Good day. H. Mahara here. I'm going to have a response to a comment here on the topic of DBT, why it isn't everything that people think it is, and in terms of your relationships and how effective is it? Because, they say out there that DBT is the gold standard. I have to record myself on something else now, too. They say that DBT is the gold standard and really the best and the only way that people with BPD can be helped, heal, or recover. And it's not true. So that's the topic here a little bit. And this commenter mentioned something interesting, but really wayward in terms of what do you need to know about the person with BPD that you're with, because so many people in the fantasy bond of the trauma bond of it all, you just believe, well, I could just get him into therapy. If they could just do this, if they would just do that, it would all work out. And it's not really true. And it's certainly not that simple by any means. And so the commenter did say at one point in their comment, they said, please correct me if I understood this incorrectly. Well, they did understand what they're going to talk about incorrectly. So, I just want to say, I'm going to get set up to go back over there. It's just about moving stuff around and things like that, and I haven't had a chance. The other thing is, this is ad hoc and took like half an hour, and this doesn't even look good. But then there's me too, and I'm old, so what are you going to do? So the other thing I was just going to say was I apologize for the air conditioner in the background because in the Greater Toronto area, in southern Ontario, and a little bit southwest of that where I'm at right now, it's freaking boiling. Like, you could cook an egg on the sidewalk, as they say, or something like that. I wouldn't want to. But the point is, it's 100, at the time I'm doing this recording, it's 113 degrees Fahrenheit with the humidex. So that means we might be like at almost like 90 something degrees, 95, 98, and then the humidex kicks it up to 113. Anyway, you're not here for a weather report. And the other thing I was just going to say too is I was going to do this elsewhere for the video portion because it'll be up on the audio. And then you don't have to worry about any of this on the podcast. But it's just too darn hot to do it anywhere else. And of course, we have other areas that are air conditioned in here, like bedroom, but I'm not doing videos in my bedroom. That's just a thing I have. I don't know. A lot of YouTubers like to do videos with their beds right there or laying on their beds and such. I don't know. So, and remember, I'm a mental health professional. I am not a professional YouTuber. And YouTube keeps throttling me, by the way. I would like to announce this for you. Every time I get past 46,000, by anywhere from 1 to 40 actual subscribers, it boots me down like 50, 60, 70, 141, back to 95,000, whatever, where I belong, I guess, according to YouTube. I have watched this now happen 11 times. It's about to happen for the 12th time, documenting in the last 6 months. So they won't let the channel grow or something's going on with that. If anybody has a clue what that's about, hey, drop a comment, let me know. So, so I didn't want to record in the bedroom, and it's air conditioned in there. And then we have the room upstairs where it's air conditioned, and of course it's, kind of more of my partner's deal up there, because the way I am not as tidy as her, we have to kind of So if I go up there, everything has to be tidy, and the dogs don't get to go up there. And they're right here in the room with me right now, because we're in the AC, in the smallest room, which is my office, sort of multi-purpose. Sometimes I have a nap in here. And I often talk to clients, but I don't nap at the same time. You know what I'm saying? Okay, anyway, I'm being silly. So, on the short that I did, Emotional Cancer, BPD Relationship Recycling, I find this fascinating that the commenter left his comment on this short, just the title and what I was trying to get across in the message. No offense to the commenter. And so the commenter said, if they choose it, people with BPD, obviously, I guess they mean. Sorry, the what do you call it? The things in my eyes, the cataracts. I have to make this so huge. It's, okay. We'll start again. If they choose it, the success rates of DBT therapy with Dr. Marsha Linehan's RCT are really good. Oh. What's RCT? I have a note over here somewhere. So RCT refers to a series of randomized controlled trials. I was going to say traits. Trials. Conducted by, initially, by Dr. Linehan, to test the effectiveness of dialectical behavioral therapy. Which, by the way, as I'm going to go on this video, hopefully not make it too long, I am not saying there's no effectiveness to dialectical behavioral therapy. And I'm not saying it isn't a rather sort of ingenious modality in and of itself. But it has severe limitations. And out there they say, well, DBT is the gold standard for, quote, recovery from BPD, unquote. No, it isn't at all. It's symptom management. It's trait management. And it isn't as effective. It can be for some people, but they really, really, really have to do it properly with the right therapist using Linehan's modalities, because a lot of DBT therapists don't use the protocol and the way that Linehan set this up to be done. But the point is, it's not the gold standard for recovery from BPD. It's kind of like a gold standard. And Linehan has spoke about this herself like a lot over the years, quite a while ago now. It's the gold standard for taking people with high I want to unalive myself percentages, right? And many, many attempts. And or really, really severe or any kind of like self-harm along with I don't want to be here anymore. Can't use that word on this channel. I don't know why. So with those kind of things going on and severe, maybe substance abuse in conjunction with other therapy and etc. It lists down here what it found it most successful at, which was severe substance use disorders. Combining DBT with that kind of therapy might help. Adolescents, adapting, DBT's been somewhat adapted for teenagers with emotional dysregulation, which, you know, some may have CPTSD or some may be diagnosable with BPD. And eating disorders and PTSD, broadening the model to target other difficult to treat populations. So DBT, I mean, there's something in DBT for everybody, if you think about the radical acceptance and the mindfulness practice. And you know, but a lot of people with BPD just aren't going to be like really doing this. And a lot of people do, but it still isn't recovery. So with this test then, which I guess is what this, you know, I was going to say YouTuber. Yeah, okay, that would be me at the moment. The commenter. And so they studied this, right? It was randomized, controlled trials. And Linehan's last one, when I looked this up, I took these notes, was, I believe, in 1991. And then there's been others. Yeah, the landmark one, as they called it. It was in 1991. And it proved that DBT successfully treated chronically, I don't want to be here anymore, I want to unalive myself adults. With borderline personality disorder. Okay. So, the key details of the trials. So, because other researchers would not have done them since Linehan's one in 1991. So, the population originally targeted, it was women with, for the studies, right, for the trials, women with BPD who exhibited severe chronic I don't want to be here anymore, and self-injuring behavior. And the comparison, and this is interesting because it kind of takes away from the sound, oh, this is great and fantastic and it helps everybody, and why doesn't everybody just get to borderline to get into DBT? Because then they'll recover, or they'll hit this remission thing, which drives me crazy because, again, these are things that are not going to affect your relationship to have any more success or recycling success or get back together in the future, like people are in the fantasy of believing, magical thinking, believing, wanting something to work so badly. So the comparison in the trials was it was DBT against, are you ready for this vulgarity and ridiculousness that doesn't prove a whole lot, like a lot of, quote, science and studies and such? It compared DBT, the effectiveness of DBT, to air quotes, treatment, now well, I was quoted here where I looked it up, treatment as usual, standard community care. Well, I can think of lots of modalities of therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, all kinds, they're in my head. All kinds of modalities of therapy in general, not for people with BPD, but if you compare them to DBT, not cognitive behavioral therapy, what am I saying? But there's a lot of modalities of therapy out there that if you just compare, like straight talk therapy with no essence of other modalities being eclectically used or something, or specifically, they compare DBT against treatment as usual, and that's in quotes, meaning standard community care. Well, that doesn't really mean a whole lot. Depends what community you're in. Depends, but you see, to me, that's where the air goes out of the balloon. So the other thing is, I have some evidence of this, but I'm not a researcher and whatnot. So, bottom line is just experientially with clients for the last 36 years, etc. And what I see online, and a lot of what clients I work with are telling me about what they went through with their person with BPD, a parent with BPD. Maybe sometimes they have more than one person with BPD in their lives and different roles, etc. Not on purpose, but stuff happens. And so in terms of this community care that DBT was compared to in 1991 in this randomized controlled trial study of Linehan's, what makes DBT look really good because community care isn't really good and probably hasn't really ever been that good, and especially it's rather useless for people with borderline personality disorder. And so the other thing I wanted to say here was that that's not really giving DBT a big boost. It might sound like it is if you don't look into the details. But the other thing is, so what with social media, what with the way the world is, what with I don't know, fill in the blank with stuff that maybe somebody should research because I don't have all the answers for this. But more and more people with borderline personality disorder in the last, 10, 15, would it be 20 years? I've been seeing comments on my channel by exes who say and I believe, they have BPD exes who are getting their PhDs in psychology, etc., or becoming social workers or whatever, and mental health clinicians of varying, levels of being degreed. So this is the other thing that you have to be really wary of. If you are somebody trying to recycle a relationship and you really want to hang on to this borderline no matter what, first of all, please watch more of my videos and please try to hear why that might not be the best thing for you to do at all. It's not the best. It's the worst thing you could possibly do, okay, to yourself. Because you're not going to fix, rescue, or change this person. And DBT therapy is not a recovery modality. But the thing is, more and more, this is a statement I want to make right here. More and more people with borderline personality disorder still in the active throes, still having, ongoing many issues in their lives and relationships, who are not recovered, have not healed, are now becoming clinicians and therapists. So I wonder, and I can only wonder from all that I hear from clients, and I've been hearing for a while, a couple years, like things change, and there's, I don't want to say mutations, but what a lot of my clients talk about, yes, there's patterns and there's some similarities in there, and a lot of differences with what they've gone through with a person with BPD. Or maybe a parent and a significant other who's now an ex, or recycling, etc. And so I don't hear the same thing from every client. Like a lot of people, when they first book a session and want to talk to me, they're like, well, because I invite people, I just, say hello, and etc., and then I invite them to start wherever they'd like to start, because it's not up to me, it's their time. And so they'll often go, well, I don't really know where to start, and then there's one common thing that's said a lot to me is, I don't know where to start. Fair enough, and I'm sure you've heard it all anyway, and then they'll find a place to start. I just want to assure you I haven't heard it all, because there's so much individuality going on with you as an individual. This is to the commenter and anyone else, right, watching, that, even if you and 9 other clients I talked to in 1 week, let's say I talked to more than that, but let's just say 10 clients. So you, if you were a client of mine, and 9 other clients, you're going to start off by saying, I think, you probably heard it all, but. And then you're going to tell me what's been happening. You're going to tell me what iteration of the cycles you're in, or if you've gone no contact and how that's going, and how much people are ruminating, and all of these things that people share that are necessary for me to know, to be able to help and to meet people where they are. And so with this, I'm just trying to say that many people will say very similar things, but there's always a difference. And there's always a difference in some circumstances of the whole experience, where they are right now, how they feel, what's going on for them, with everything. Because each and every single person I speak with, work with, you're all, of course, individuals. Just like people with BPD aren't all the freaking same. So anyway, more and more people with BPD are now therapists. So you might send or manipulate or strongly advise or give an ultimatum, which none of that really works a lot, but sometimes. If you don't go to therapy, we can't get back together. And so maybe they go to therapy, and maybe it's not particularly DBT, and I don't know about DBT, I can't tell you. There's more borderlines, well, I know of a few in Ontario, so I can say that there are definitely unhealed borderlines who might have worked the skills, but probably aren't working through Linehan's training mechanisms, because that's really how she wants DBT to be delivered, not just people to read her book manual and start doing it in their own way. There's a lot of that going on too. But the bottom line, my really point that's important for all you out there is more and more borderlines are becoming therapists, more and more people trying to get their borderline or X or on and off and on and off to go to therapy. And I can't give you numbers or anything on this, right? I just think it's on the rise. And it's especially true for women with BPD more than men. But then a lot of men with BPD just never, I think fewer of them ever get to therapy than even females. But the point is, so a lot of women out there, they find these therapists that are either borderlines themselves. What happens when they start talking about, from their perspective, their misperceptions, their projections, their interjected stuff, their repetition compulsions of things coming out in the past, how they, quote, perceive what's going on with you in the relationship. They're talking to a borderline therapist, not always, but sometimes. And I don't mean a therapist specializing in borderline. I mean somebody with BPD too, like the client. And they're talking to them, and they'll throw you under the bus 9 times out of 10 in these things, because I've talked to a lot of clients who've done this, and their partner, ex, whatever, on and off, went to some kind of therapy and crazy things that aren't therapy, but and even DBT as well. And for some reason, they're just thrown under the bus, and the therapist validates everything that the borderline says. Does that mean that every therapist that would do that is a borderline? No, because there's a lot of therapists out there who don't know anything really about borderline personality disorder, and they take on these clients, and that's when it all is just dangerous and useless. And that's what they compared DBT to. Standard community care. So whether you find your therapist online or not, you find someone, and let's say they really are a qualified therapist, but they don't specialize in BPD. Then, what's going to happen in that treatment? Nothing. Just a lot of, right fighting by the borderline, a lot of war. And then there's when people, think that the person who's seeing somebody, I've heard it, well, not at all. I've heard a lot of clients say, well, then she went and she wouldn't go to any, real therapist, but she found this coach, she found this person, she found this, and they're talking about their auras and their chakras and their this and that. And and that's lovely, and that can have some meaning some places in life, but not for BPD treatment and recovery. So more borderline therapists out there than ever before. And then what a lot of you do, a lot of people, a lot of clients I'm working with now and have been working with over all these years, they want to, after they get the borderline, or the borderline kind of says, okay, I'll do this therapy, and it might not really be therapy and nothing's really happening in the process, or it could be DBT being done by somebody who still has active BPD and they're not doing it the way that you're supposed to do it, because it's supposed to be trained by Linehan's people, if I could put it that way, and go down there and be trained, etc., and do it the way she wants it to be done. That's effective DBT therapy for how far that can go for people. So, what was my other point on this? So then what happens is, I've had many, many clients over the years, countless, too many to count, that say, well, then she was seeing some therapist, or she went to DBT, but it might not have been the proper, appropriate way that trained DBT therapists are supposed to give you DBT. So there's that too. And then they'll say, well, and then I thought, well, things were like a little bit better. Some people report something changed a little bit, but the core of the problems in relationships still there. The splitting, the devaluing, the on and off, this and that, the ghosting. Not that all that gets better. They just maybe feel a little bit hurt once in a while. And who's to say that that's going to stick? It's not going to stick with a person with BPD in standard, community care or DBT, because, or if they're working with the person with BPD as well, because they don't have a self still. And what's going to stick inside of, when there's nothing there for things to stick inside of besides the IQ? And the IQ, many people with BPD, they can come back to you. They have a few sessions. They'll tell you something about it. Sounds really good. Don't be fooled. Don't let your fantasy lead you any further down the road by the nose, so to speak, with all due respect. Because it's the intellect of the borderline who comes back to tell you and then weaponize and switch around what's really going on in a lot of these instances where they go to therapy. Because borderlines traditionally don't really stick with therapy. I'm not saying every single one, but the majority. Like for all of you out there with untreated people with BPD. Now they're finally going to go. You got them to go, whatever the case. Well, they don't usually stick with it unless they're getting uber validated. And uber validation is part of, DBT or part of any therapy, but clinicians that don't have any experience working with borderlines going to validate all the wrong things. And people with BPD who are clinicians, active BPD that is, not well treated, not treated enough, not healed or recovered, they're going to do the same thing. And then, so you hear a little bit of blah, 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 sounds pretty good. It's coming from the borderline's intellect. It's got nothing to do with emotional change or building up relational skills or finding self, which is at the core of all of BPD recovery, which without that, there can be no healthy relationship, no matter what they learn or learn to weaponize against you. Then what comes next for so many of my clients, throughout the years and recently, and even people I'm working with now, what comes next is, well, I think, maybe we should go to some joint therapy now, because now she seems to understand this or that. They'll just have little things to report, like where they had a better conversation than usual. Intellect, again, from the borderline, no emotional change, or no discovery, or having a self, reclaiming and working to reclaim and, get a healthy self. So then they want to do joint therapy. And I don't want to jump too many topics here, but I just wanted to say, and I'll do a short video on this probably, but I have a lot of clinicians. I always have had. And recently there were 4 or 5 in the last, month or so. I don't believe this is happening again. I'm going to kill this phone. I'm going to turn it off right now. There were 3 or 4 clinicians that I had sessions with that approached me to talk to me about some things to do with BPD. They were all couples therapists. They were exceedingly knowledgeable in the modalities that are used in couples therapy. Many of them, they don't all use the same modalities. But they had booked a session and booked sessions with me to try to understand, because some of them get traumatized in the process of trying to stay within the way that they practice clinically and to stay within the way that they deliver couples therapy and what couples therapy is really designed to deliver and how it helps couples in relationships. Not designed at all for anybody who's personality disordered. If you got one person in the couple who's personality disordered, no, this goes out the window. And so I've had clinicians contacting me because they don't know what to do and or they're traumatized from what actually happened in sessions. And then the way that people with BPD can be so critical and cruel and sometimes not only vindictive but a little sadistic, some of these clinicians get shaken personally and lose a little confidence in the work they're doing. So, I guess I just said enough here. I don't have to do it again. I can make a short out of that part or something. But what I'm trying to say is please, please, please do not think that if they're in some kind of therapy, DBT, or working with a borderline or working with whatever the case is, until they get into a modality where they can find the lost self that psychologically died from the abandonment trauma and like that Melanie quote Melanie Klein quote I'm always quoting. Abandonment trauma causes a psychological death of the otherwise burgeoning authentic self. So all these people with BPD have a false self and no identity to hang on to, the lack of object consciency, the empathy problems, all of this. This is the core, and the approach avoidance conflict and much more, which I've spoken about in many videos and on many podcasts, and some are the same, whatever. But the core of what BPD recovery requires, and I would know because I had those traits and I went through that, because I'll get back to what the commenter said here in a minute. Well, I guess this would be a good place to get back to what the commenter said, because yeah, it's just meaningless, and so misleads so many of you. So what the commenter said was, first of all, notice it all begins with, in capitals and quotes, if they choose it. And sometimes even when it looks like they're choosing it, they're not really choosing it. They're not going to be able to stick with it because it's very complex and a very daunting and lengthy amount of therapy needed for BPD recovery. And then the commenter said, if they do not, it's really out of everyone else's hands. Well, and even if they do, it's still, what I'm here to say essentially is, you're saving that relationship, or you're changing that person, or you're waiting for that person to change in therapy. It doesn't take a year. And remission, I've done videos on why remission doesn't really mean anything. Because no matter what you talk about, the RCIs, RCTs that look really good, as the commenter said, compared to community standard care, what? I mean, come on. And out there, DBT is called the gold standard in all the books and all this kind of stuff. I won't name the publisher, but somebody wanted me years ago. I got a what do you call it? An invitation in. I got contacted. Somebody made that happen for me, and I never asked for it. And so I was approached by a publisher, a really popular one, that wanted me to change my whole story for a memoir, because when I healed and recovered from some BPD traits, right, and have it full blown, and it took 15 years still. But when I did that work, they wanted me to like DBTize it for if I was going to write that memoir. There was no way I was going to do that. I mean, not only is it unethical and ridiculous, but so I believe, since I had that experience, what are publishers going after and how much gets manipulated and changed? Because, I mean, a publisher wants people to write books so they can sell their books and make money. And I'm sure they care about the information and more often than not. But in this case, I'd written somewhat of, not a full treatment, but a large amount of my reality and what happened to me, my story. And they were really interested, but they didn't like that I didn't have any DBT therapy. Well, I was in therapy and I recovered before DBT was invented or came to the fruition of being known. And also, DBT comes out in the U.S. around 1993, I believe. And it doesn't arrive in Canada for another 7 years anyways. And by then, I was like, my therapy is long in my past. So, this idea that, even if they choose it, I'll go on to the next point. And then, the commenter continues, also, her protocol was intensive to have remission within 1 year. Well, when I looked this up and what I was reading from and kind of had a couple of my own notes and was quoting a little thing there, which I should have made clear, sorry. I didn't mean to not. So this person said also her protocol was intensive, capitalized, right, to have remission within 1 year. Remission within 1 year. Doesn't that sound great? If you're somebody really aching right now and you're, ruminating, I forgot the word. You're ruminating on the borderline and it's on off. Maybe you're not hearing from them now. Maybe you blocked them, but you don't know how to cope with it. And they blocked you and it's on and off and well, I tried to block and now I'm getting all these calls over here, and why would he or she contact me now? Because so all this stuff that goes on, people are suffering horribly. And then there's this information out here, but it just isn't true. It doesn't mean what the commenter here, with all due respect to the commenter, it doesn't mean what he or she believed, and it's what you want to hear. That within DBT, these people with BPD can just hit remission within a year. Well, firstly, we'd have to go into, and I've done videos on this, so I won't right now, right here. What the F does remission really mean? Okay? Because that's a problem. And I've talked about it. I'm sorry, I don't know what video, I can't reference, but whatever, or podcast. But I've talked about that because BPD remission is simply stated as being when a person who met 5 or more traits and was diagnosed with BPD, when they have 4 traits or less, and they no longer have 5. And people with BPD are running around all over the world, the internet and everything, saying, see, I'm in remission, I don't have BPD anymore because I have 4 traits, not 5 or enough to have BPD anymore. It means absolutely nothing. Because I don't know, I've been working in this area, and I work with people with BPD as well, and I went through the whole thing myself, and I don't think that anybody, when I was in my healing journey and doing all that hard, daunting work for all those years, I don't think any therapist, like when I was presented with all the stuff after, when they told me that I had recovered, all of their, all of their, they'd be keeping stats and charts and measuring all these things about, who I was especially the group therapy, the 4.5 so years I did that. They had all of these metrics, okay? So all this data on when I walked through the door in the beginning and what was going on, and all the work we'd done, and all these different things that you measure in somebody with BPD traits or BPD, or whenever you're working with someone, you need to know what was the starting point, what were the biggest problems. And for me, it was the core of what BPD is. It wasn't all of it, but it was the core. So, and so when I did get told that I recovered, I had a meeting with all of the people that were, because it was a group program, and so there was 5 therapists. We had that meeting. It was lengthy. They showed me all of the data, all of the stats, all of the charts, all of the measurements, not all their notes, but all the things that they were measuring, that they could now tell me this, as well as I'd found myself in that therapy, and I knew that life was really different, and I had really changed. But then you have to grow into the change as well. Doesn't mean you still act BPD once you recovered, but it just means you sometimes don't know what to do or say because you're still learning and growing in the, quote, healthier way. So anyway, I don't want to make this too long, but so this 1 year idea of remission, no. And even if a person with BPD could be, like people out there say, so after a year of DBT therapy, it's, I can't even handle, it's crazy. But if you want to believe that probably. So if after a year they could be in remission from BPD, what would that mean? Well, they still won't have found the self, because that doesn't happen in the modality of DBT therapy. And they need the self to deal with the core issues, so working backwards, right? It's like the evacuation of the otherwise burgeoning authentic self. So person is in remission, if that's what they want to call it. I don't agree with this at all. I don't believe it's really, it doesn't matter. It's not an important metric because they're still without a self. So through DBT, after a year, if they're, quote, going to be called remitted or claim they're remitted, it's only like supposedly because they meet 4 traits now and not 5 or 6, 7, 8, 9. But how do we measure that all the time? It's not that easy to measure. And the secondary thing about remission that's super important for you to know, even if whatever it means anything, it is, they don't have the self, like I said, right? And they maybe learn some skills in DBT. They can either use them appropriately or weaponize them. They may have learned them more intellectually, not been able to take them on emotionally, because they're still emotionally young, arrested children. with arrested emotional development by or before the age of 2. Because DBT therapy does not really change that at all. It helps people manage it better. And they're often managing from the IQ. So without going on too much longer, I would like to say, what does that mean? It means that for you trying to relate to them, and then you think you should go off to joint therapy, couples therapy, please don't do it. You're wasting your money, wasting your time, and it's not your fault if your partner with BPD traumatizes one of these, very hardworking couples therapists that are nothing in couples therapy, nothing in the process of becoming a couples therapist it has anything to do with being expert or understanding personality disorders, because there is no pathway for a person with a personality disorder who has not healed and recovered, and 1 year of DBT and whatever remission somebody might mean by that does not meet the criteria of recovered from BPD whatsoever. And then you want to go off to your joint couples therapy. It always blows up. It never works. And I've worked with many people, like first I'm working with the person who's the codependent, non-borderline, and then they say, well, my person with BPD has done this, and evidently they think, they believe. And then so that person, and we do joint work, and I can tell right away most of the time. I mean, I've never had a client that was, because they're having all these relationship issues and the on and off and all what goes on in these relationships, I've never had a client bring to me the X or the on off or the we're pausing right now but we want to get back together or we just got back together borderline. 2 joint sessions with me that has been anywhere near BPD recovery. One was near, let me say, one had done tons of work. One case, it was about 5-8 years ago now. She had done tons of work, without a doubt. But the issues that they were still having, going back to unfinished, work of how in therapy people with BPD have to find the lost self. And so she hadn't got that part quite done. And it was evident because of some of the issues they were still having. Like, her husband was late one day. And what was working for them at that point, to come home from work, and he would always call her, pretty much, and something, I don't remember what it was, but something just peculiar, not tragic, but really out of that man's hands that day happened, and he was late, and he wasn't able to call. So that was working when he was able to call. So she'd done a lot of work. This is one little piece of an example. But then the one day, for some reason, they told me, but I don't remember all these years later, that he couldn't call. She couldn't let it go. And she was livid, and she was splitting him all to black. All that came back up in spite of all of her work, and it was evident. And he's sitting there, and she didn't really rage, but she started to get a little more aggressive in the way she was presenting verbally, obviously blaming him. And what was he supposed to do to remedy this? So then what was the other issue that came up? Well, this person had done a lot of work in therapy for their BPD, but they hadn't yet worked out how to repair. Like in the approach avoidance core issue of all of what BPD is and then some, there was no repair. It was still split. You were supposed to do this and you didn't do it. You're all bad. And at one point in that session, I remember it was heartbreaking because they had children and everything, and she said to him, because he didn't know what to say, there was nothing left to say because she couldn't hear anything. She just wanted to hear what she wanted to hear. And I don't mean that with any disrespect, and she was right fighting at that point, and that also is, not recovery, even though she'd done so much work. And so there was nothing he could say, because he was already boxed in and no win, and she was black and white, and then it's like, what am I going to say, because she's not going to hear me either. And I could see his plight and his agony, and she, I heard her, and then she said to him, she just looked around and she said, well, because maybe he did say something at one point, and it wasn't good enough for her. And then she said, well, maybe I'll just get a divorce and start over with somebody else. And at that point, I was like, wow. And this was a man who thought, like, my wife has had a lot of therapy now, and we can do this. And, like, not if they don't build that container of self and what that whole process in BPD is about, they're not going to get to recovery because you can't have your emotional intelligence grow, people with BPD, without first having a self, because they're missing a self. Okay? So I've gone on too long here, but anyway, that the remission thing, don't buy it. I've had client after client after client too tell me, I'm not just saying this because it sounds convenient at the moment to what I'm saying, but they've been around the cycle many, many times. The person's been in therapy, whether it was, was it with a borderline person active in the throes of BPD clinician now that's qualified to give therapy to people? Yikes. Was it with a person that's not an expert in BPD? Yikes. Was it just wasn't the therapy that it was supposed to be? And again, a lot of people with BPD, more than not, are very intelligent. And they're going to say things in ways you want to hear, but they can't deliver it emotionally. They still don't have a self. They still can't relate to you. They still don't see you. They might hear you here and there, as opposed to when they never heard you. But not really, because it's still they don't have the self from which to hold that. Because we have to have our self, each of us, our own self, to be able to listen to somebody else and know the difference that, okay, what I'm hearing from this person is their experience, and I'm me over here, and I know the difference between me and that person, so I can stay with them and hear their experience and care about it, offer support, whatever, depending on the relationship type, or of course I do that in working with clients, and I know where I end and where the client begins. You got people with BPD without, regaining the self. It's a lousy way to put it, but without finding the lost self, don't have the self from which to change anything really majorly emotionally about how they relate to other. You would be the other, and you will still be object other parent representation, because 1 year of DBT therapy, even if they call it remission, means nothing to the way in which these people beyond intellect using words and or weaponizing words and things they've learned in maybe DBT, they cannot. They will be using skills. Okay, so this is hard work. Lots of people try really hard with BPD to do this. That's great. More people should. But they'll be using those skills. But guess what? What does that mean when you're in a relationship? It means you're going to experience a whole lot more of the same because they still don't have the self. DBT is not a recovery modality, and remittance means nothing to relating, to relationships, to what you want them to go there for, to how you'd love it if they could be, quote, remitted. What does that mean in a year? I can promise you nothing that will make your relationship work. Nothing that will stabilize the core of what is wrong and toxic and totally unhealthy in relationships between people with borderline personality disorder and people with codependency, because it's no good for either of you. And a lot of that has to do with the borderline and borderline personality disorder, absolutely, but a piece of it is yours as a codependent as well. And a lot of my clients, from just listening to a lot of my videos or podcasts, will say to me, well, I know you always say that it's not just the borderline, and I want to look at myself, but I just have to say this is about him or her, or whatever the case, and that's fine. But what they're trying to tell me, I guess, and they don't have to at that point, I'm not going to be judgmental. I don't tell clients what to do. They're informing me about themselves, and we work on things. And it's a joint adventure, of venture, not adventure, could be an adventure too. But the point is that what you think this means from the fantasy bond aspect of the trauma bond, you're just going to reset yourself up to go through other loops. And maybe the loops somewhat change, maybe the time of the ghosting, maybe the this, that. But the core of relating that's required for that other human being, the person with BPD, to have a self, if they haven't, that's why transference focused psychotherapy is a way better modality. Mentalized based treatment, schema therapy sometimes, but probably not on its own. If a person with BPD really wants to recover, transference focused psychotherapy is the way to go. I say that based on a lot of my own lived experience, and why that transference with therapists and or other people in a group is absolutely golden to help people, and especially to work with that core piece of helping somebody with BPD form a self. The self is formed largely by the therapist outside of the person with BPD. And in the work of the therapy, and this doesn't happen in DBT therapy, within this work then, the self is being constructed between the therapist and or the process, but not DBT therapy, and the client. And then it's up to the therapist to help the client to understand a whole lot more. So a lot of work has to get done before you get to this point. And then they have to be somewhat aware of what the process is requiring, what it feels like. It's still very daunting. It still feels annihilating to most people at BPD at that stage, and I can speak from lived experience again, where the next step but it takes tons of work to get to this step, not a year and not DBT therapy, of taking a created self that is now between a client and a therapist and helping the client to interject and take inside that self and know that self. And what else does that require? Requires a lot of unlearning of all the defense mechanisms used from early childhood on, and that are help people with BPD survive childhoods often, but once they become young adults, late teens, young adults, very, very maladaptive to relationships. So please don't buy this. And no offense to the commenter, I'm sure you read it somewhere, you heard it somewhere, you hope for it, maybe you think it works. Nobody's going to go to DBT therapy and, quote, if they're remitted in a year, that's essentially meaningless. And to what you need to know, to what you're hoping for, to like if you would go back or try again in that relationship, you're not going to get the person that you expect. You're not going to get major change that you're dreaming about, and understandably, like no disrespect intended. And so, then they said, so after they'd said about this remission within a year, after DBT, which, like I said, it's meaningless for relationships and for you who's trying to get this person to be able to act like, and be mutual and reciprocal with you. No, that's not going to happen after your DBT, even if they call themselves, or somebody said, they're remitted. It's ridiculous. The commenter goes on to say, some took over a decade. Please correct me if I understood this incorrectly. Well, I think that's what I've been doing, with all due respect. And the other thing is that some took over a decade. Well, you can go to DBT and you can work that kind of therapy. You can do that for 2 decades or 3 decades or 4 decades or 5 decades. Not going to find the lost, authentic self that were emotionally arrested by or before the age of 2 in the modality of DBT therapy whatsoever. So, then the commenter said, the only real control we have when dealing with a person with BPD is putting on our oxygen mask first, which has nothing, capitalized, so, emphasized, right? Has nothing to do with the BPD person. And I agree with that to a point, commenter. Anybody can relate to this. But the only real control we have when dealing with a person with BPD is putting on our own oxygen mask first, which has nothing to do with the borderline. Yeah, but just putting on your own oxygen mask, what does that really mean? Because if you do that first, and then you're going to buy this baloney that they've gone to DBT for a year, and now they can be remitted, and that means something's going to make your relationship work. No, not at all. So if you got your oxygen mask on, I would say at the time you believe that this person is now wholly changed, relationship can work like in a year. Are you kidding me? In DBT therapy alone? No. Well, then the oxygen in your mask stops working. Then what? Because this is the struggle. I like that metaphor or whatever it is. That, you put on your oxygen mask and you're starting to take care of yourself. But if you're still waiting for the borderline through treatment to get to this place where it's going to work and whatever, okay, I don't know what the person meant. Because to me, when you put your oxygen mask on first, you get the HE double hockey sticks out. You stop. You go no contact. And then you get into therapy. Because I have clients coming to work with me from all different stages and places in this, right? You don't have to, be no contact. You don't have to be sure that you don't want to be with the person anymore. You can be in the active pits of HE double hockey stick agony, trauma bond, fantasy bond, betrayal bond. You don't know why. You just can't let this person go. You know now it's nuts. You know it's hurting you. You've lost yourself. you feel like you've gone nuts. People have just said things. I'm not, trying to insult anybody, but you just don't know who you are anymore. And I'm getting more and more clients now, last 2 to 3 years, who've been with a person with BPD. Now they want to unalive themselves. And yes, I've lost clients recently in the last 2 to 3. Never had clients showing up. There were exes of people with BPD that were wanting to unalive themselves before 2-3 years ago. Everything is incrementally getting worse in this whole universe, and this what do we call that? I don't know, but the cacophony of noise of so many that don't know what they're talking about when they talk about borderline personality disorder.